Alright, why don't I get this out of the way? I quite like the Pokemon games. It's a fun and rather unique RPG series that can appeal to a lot of people. During the late 90s and early 2000s, Pokemon was ridiculously popular and still kinda is. So with popularity comes, for a lack of a better word, imitators. Other RPGs and games that try to give a similar monster catching and battling experience with their own twists, which takes us to Jade Cocoon. Now yes, I have played some of the first Jade Cocoon for the PlayStation, but that was after playing Jade Cocoon 2. Before the second game, I had never even heard of the series. In fact, the only reason I know about Jade Cocoon 2 was because I was looking for monster RPGs for the PlayStation 2. And for those of you who are wondering, I tend to refer to games like Pokemon as monster RPGs, because to me they seem to have created their own little subgenre. Not really knowing much about the games, I went into Jade Cocoon 2 blind, but still rather curious about what I was going to play. So, is Jade Cocoon 2 worth playing? Why don't we begin things with the story, and oh boy is this an interesting one. So the story takes place 100 years after the first game, where now Beastmasters have replaced Cocoon Masters of old. A young boy named Kahu dreams of becoming a beast hunter, so he travels to the temple of Kemule, I think that's how you pronounce it, where he meets Levant, the hero of the first game. Eager to get started, Levant has Kahu take the test to get his beast hunter license. Unfortunately, while doing so, he gets cursed, in which he slowly becomes a demon and grows a tail. Returning to Levant, Kahu looks for a cure. Levant recommends that he journey deep into the four forests and use the power of the elemental orbs to cure him. And that's really it. To be fair, it's a rather simple setup, which I don't mind. It gives Kahu a good reason to want to go on his own adventure, to, well, cure himself of his curse. A problem with the story for me is that things start to get more grand scale much later in the game, and it all becomes unnecessarily confusing. What makes this a little more confusing is that the game has a rather complicated mythos and world that can get hard to follow, so if you miss one detail, you'll end up being really confused. This might be something that bothers me personally, as I really like trying to get into a game's world and understand it, but with Jade Cocoon, I seem to have a hard time getting a good grasp of what the world's all about. This includes both this game and the first one. However, an area where the game's story works is its side characters, or at least it works for me. You see, as Kahu adventures in the forest, he comes across certain characters who end up having their own side stories. I don't really like Gills, but Nam works good as a rival to Kahu, and the Sweet Knights are a fun and interesting group of beast hunters. Of all these little side stories though, my all-time favorite and favorite character in the game is Cures, a young girl who seems to be an advanced divine beast who fears the other hunters but befriends Kahu. Kahu in of himself is just okay. He's not really an interesting character, and he can get annoying at times, but that's not entirely his fault. I'll explain later. To put it bluntly, he's just a really generic main lead character with nothing really that interesting about him. Though I will say he's far better than Nico, this fairy creature he meets when taking his tests. I don't hate Nico, but I do find her to be more annoying, and I really don't get her purpose. In the end, the main story is just okay, but it's helped by having some more interesting and entertaining side stories. There really isn't too much to talk about in the game's ending, stuff just happens. Though I will say that how things end for Cure, I actually really like, and I find it to be quite fulfilling. Let me now explain what I was talking about when I said Kahu being annoying isn't entirely his fault. I say this because of the translation. See, the voice acting in the game isn't all that bad. In fact, there are some pretty decent performances here. I'm actually impressed with how almost all the characters are voiced and almost every line in the game is spoken. It takes a lot of work to do that. But holy crap, there is some bad translation here. I think part of my confusion with the story has to do with this too. There will be moments when characters are talking to each other and you feel lost because it seems like there are sentences missing or something was translated wrong. It ends up becoming unintentionally awkward and at times funny. With that out of the way, why don't we talk about the gameplay? As Kahu, you will be spending half your time in the temple and half your time in the forest. Let's talk about the forest first, as this is the easiest to explain. There are 4 different forest groups you can visit, each one being based off of one of the 4 elements: fire, earth, water, and wind. In the forest, you will walk down very narrow walkways to these large plant rooms called ogre vines. You will want to find the ogre vine that will give you a key spore, which is needed to let you go to the next floor. Yes, the forest is divided up into floors, with the last floor of the forest taking you to a boss fight. Keep in mind that there are multiple forests for each of these elements. Ogre vines that don't have key spores will sometimes have items for you to use or even sell, like how the earth forest will often have jewels that you can sell for plenty of money. There are times when you can find other beast hunters to fight in the ogre vines as well, who will eventually give you an egg if you beat certain beast hunters enough times. You can also get eggs by finding monster nests in these ogre vines as well. In predetermined ogre vines, you can find these plants that will fully heal your party, and plants that will allow you to combine two items together to make all new ones. Here's a helpful hint for those of you who are planning on playing this game. At these item mixing plants, which are often found in the wind forests, you can mix a monster egg with a flame or blaze book, and this will give you an all new egg. Of course, you will also encounter enemies as well to fight and earn some experience points, and if things start getting too hairy in the forest, you can just easily teleport out of them. That's really about it, to be honest. I have to confess, while I find the ogre vines and key spores an interesting way of getting through the forest, the narrow pathways on the other hand make it rather boring to navigate these forests. Plus, all these forests look the same. Sure, the colors are different, and there are some effects that differ too, like rain, but the basic look of the forests are all similar and don't do enough to differentiate themselves. That doesn't mean I hate them, I just find them to get rather boring. But at the very least, they don't look bad, as there is some nice detail to these forests. Time to move on to the temple and its multiple rooms. The throne room is a place where you can visit the forest. It's also at the temple where you can save your game. At the lounge, you can talk to some other characters and hunters here. That is actually kind of fun because it helps make the world feel a little bit more lived in. More importantly though, this is where you can do jobs. Talk to the bulletin board to get a job, which will range from giving someone certain items, delivering something for someone, and even trading eggs. You will need a certain amount of reputation to take a job, and jobs with higher reputation will often reward you with more money, better items, and more reputation. As yes, by doing jobs, you can increase your reputation. I like these jobs. Sure, some can get rather annoying, but the rewards like certain items that will increase the stats of certain monsters is actually pretty great. I have one quick complaint though. I have beaten this game and I've played it from time to time after doing so because I want to try to get all the monsters. The only way you can get the water drac is from Cure, who will give you its egg as a reward for doing a job for her. Or at least that's what I've been told. I've been checking this damn bulletin board for over a year and still no job with an egg as a reward. It's always been something else. I just want my water drac, damn it. Speaking of reputation, why don't we move on to the next room? The arena. In the arena, you can take these advancement tests that will require a certain amount of reputation to do so. By taking these tests, you can upgrade your beast amulet, which lets you use more monsters in battle and increases the amount of hits Kahu can take. You can also take part in tournaments that will either restrict the number of monsters you can have or have special gimmicks to them, which is something that I actually rather like. Taking part in tournaments is something I really enjoy in monster RPGs, like Pokemon Colosseum and Pokemon XD, though these tournaments don't take place in really cool locations, and your only reward is unfortunately just an increase in reputation. This is probably a good time to talk about the amulet and how battles work. Basically, fights are a lot like triple rotation battles in Pokemon. Kind of. Battles are turn-based, with hunters rotating their ring of monsters to choose who will be fighting. You will win by either taking out all of your opponent's monsters or hitting the hunter enough times. Unfortunately, you can't choose who your monsters should target. They attack whomever they want, which I do find to be a bit annoying. A monster's move will cost them magic points, while monsters that aren't fighting will recover a small amount of magic points back. It becomes a battle of using your monsters tactically and trying to out-strategize your opponent, and usually you'll want to try to take out all your opponent's monsters first, especially if they have some annoying ones, as keep in mind they're fighting the same way as you. Battling hunters is actually more difficult than taking on some of the wild monster bosses, which I actually don't mind. Moving on, we have the Kikanak and Company room where you can buy and store items. Also, sorry if I mispronounced that name. There's a lot of names I just don't quite know how to pronounce in here. Last but not least, we have the Room of Life. Here you can take a look at the encyclopedia on your monsters, rename your monsters, and even rearrange your party. But most importantly, this is where you can hatch monster eggs and merge your monsters. So what is merging? Well, you see, another thing that you can find in the ogre vines in the forest are these creatures called seed beasts, which are usually these tough evil monsters. If you beat a seed beast, you will get that creature to use for merging. Once one of your own monsters, referred to as Divine Beast, has reached level 15 to max, which is pretty much level 20, they can then merge with a Seed Beast. By merging, you will give your monster a new move and ability, and depending on their compatibility, more points towards their evolution. The tougher the Seed Beast, the better moves you can give your monsters. As for abilities on the other hand, well, your Divine Beast can have up to 4 of those. These abilities will range drastically. Some will give you stat boosts, make your monsters immune to certain status elements, make their attacks do more damage to certain monster types, and even recover their health each turn. So, as you can imagine, merging your Divine Beast with the right Seed Beast can really help you create strong and useful monsters that will be great for your team. The evolution bar lets you know if your Divine Beast can evolve when in battles, which happens randomly. And yes, this is something that really annoys me too. When a Divine Beast evolves, not only do they look different, but they also get an increase to their stats, so it's a good thing. I find that you can merge your Divine Beasts about 4 to 5 times before they start needing way too much experience points to keep leveling up, as their levels do reset after being merged. You can get Seed Beasts for most of the monsters in the game, but the North American version of the game is missing some of the Seed Beasts for the rare monster types, those being the Drax and Mau, which is unfortunate to me as this leaves their compatibility to be very limited, and it just means that the North American version is missing some things from the original. You know what? Why don't we talk about the monsters themselves for a little bit? Character models look pretty good in the game as they have some nice detail to them, but the monsters are by far the best and coolest looking things in this game. Not only do they have some great colors and detail to them, but there are some nicely creative designs as well. Though I do have to admit, there are also very crappy designs too. Kinda like Pokemon, different monsters excel in different stats, which helps make them feel more unique from each other. Each of the monsters are of a different element, and each element tends to have different strengths. Water monsters are often healers with great health. Fire monsters tend to have high attacking stats, wind monsters will often inflict others with status elements, and earth monsters often have moves that increase their team's defenses. I really like using different kinds of monsters to see what I think of them. Some of my favorites were water healers that were bulky enough to take some hits, and earth-based monsters who can create a stone wall to take hits from my team. Then we have the music, which is actually quite good. Most of the themes are atmospheric calm pieces, and I quite like a lot of them, like the temple theme and some of the water forest music. To be fair, there are battle themes that are more upbeat, and that do a pretty good job of getting you in the battling mood. So, would I recommend Jade Cocoon 2? Yeah, I would, but only if you really like monster RPGs. This game is most certainly flawed. First off, the main story gets rather confusing, which isn't helped by poor translation. There are missing seed beasts, forests are very repetitive and lack much variety. There really isn't a level cap, which is a personal issue for me. You can't really control who your monsters will target, and for some reason, fights in the forest seem to have very poor lighting. With all that being said, the turn-based combat is really unique and interesting, and does open itself to some interesting strategies, and fights can be quite challenging, especially when you end up in fights you didn't mean to start. I also like the variety of monsters, and merging is an interesting way of customizing your team. Another cool feature is that you can save your party and use them to fight against your friends. Lastly, while the story isn't great, I do really like Kira's side story, and she's an interesting and likable character with a nice arc. Maybe it's because I really like monster RPGs, but I kinda enjoy this game, and I think it has some really good ideas. But I do have to admit, it can get pretty repetitive, which can get dull. It's not my favorite monster RPG for the system, but I do find myself coming back to this game from time to time. Well, why don't we take a break from RPGs for now, and next time we'll start talking about a platforming series that is often considered the counter to a certain other series I covered last year.